welcome back to room 303 in sophomore English. We turn in our hymnals now to pages 656, 657, 658. And on page 658, we're going to work with Robert Frost's Mowing. Before we get there, though, just to remind a little bit about our focus here. We're really concentrating in our conversation about the speaker of the text. We're asking about who that speaker is. Again, that does not have to be the poet. We're asking as well about the issues of figurative language, okay, and symbolism. So write this one down at 2B. We're going to be paying attention to issues of symbolism in some of the poems now of the collection number 2, as your textbook will call it. We're going to begin with the great Robert Frost. I'm with you on page 657. Robert Frost, that name should immediately sound familiar to you from your freshman year. You'll remember that we messed around with the road not taken, 2 roads diverged in a path, I took the road less traveled, and that has made all the difference, that famous poem. Also, I think you'll remember maybe that we did fire and ice. Some say the world will end with fire, some say with ice, and all of that. Write this down at 3A along with those two titles. Along with those two titles, write down at 3A this. In your junior year, we're going to come back to study this great American author in detail. We're going to look at his maybe most famous poem, Mending Wall. So write that one down, Mending Wall. By the way, you can go and find these on learnstrong.net if this poet interests you and you want to learn more about it before you even get to your junior year. We're also going to do a poem called Out, Out, which is a very disturbing poem for a lot of my junior readers, and another text called Acquainted with the Night. So we're going to see a lot of Robert Frost. Why? Let's read a little bit about him. Frost worked, this is important by the way for Mowing, Frost worked as a farmer, also an editor and a school teacher, absorbing the ebb and flow of New England life. So write that down. He mirrors a lot of what it was like to live in New England. He went on to become one of America's most successful poets, winning many awards, including 4 Pulitzer Prizes. He also got to read a poem at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, and we'll study some about that as well in our high school career. Okay, let's turn to the poem itself now on 658, Mowing. Let's read a little bit of background information. Like in Danny Deaver, we're going to have some dialect happening. Read with me on 658. A dialect is the distinct form of a language spoken by people in a particular region or group. The speaker of this poem uses New England dialect words such as swale, referring to a marshland, and make, referring to the process of drying out hay. He also uses the outdated word fay, meaning fairy or elf. Through these words, Frost creates a speaker who is a man of the land. Write that down at level 1. Our speaker in this poem is a worker of the land, a traditional New England farmer. Now, if you look in the picture there on 658, that's the way they used to hay. We, of course, live in a community where we see these huge tractors that are involved in haying, yes? But in the old days, this was what you used. Let's now just enjoy the poem, and then we'll come back to make some quick observations. Here we go.
Mowing by Robert Frost. There was never a sound beside the wood but one, and that was my long scythe whispering to the ground. What was it whispered? I knew not well myself. Perhaps it was something about the heat of the sun, something perhaps about the lack of sound, and that was why it whispered and did not speak. It was no dream of the gift of idle hours, or easy gold at the hand of fay or elf. Anything more than the truth would have seemed too weak to the earnest love that laid the swale in rows, not without feeble pointed spikes of flowers, pale orchises, and scared a bright green snake. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. My long scythe whispered and left the hay to make.
All right, let's pay attention to the ways in which this very simple poem draws a powerful picture for us. By the way, notice that we have at the end of the poem snake and make with our rhyming. Did you see this in the end rhyme? Okay. Let's talk through it really quickly. There was never a sound beside the wood but one, and that was my long scythe whispering to the ground. The scythe, the instrument that you see in the picture there, the cutting. Of course, let's say really quickly that we know something a little bit about a figure in history that's dressed all in black, that has a scythe in his hand? Write it down really quickly. What are we talking about? When we want to portray death, we will often portray death as dressed all in black with a hood and a scythe. Why? Well, each life is like a grain of a piece of grain or grass, and death is the one cutting it. Okay, so we've got some of that standing in the background here, right? Number two, let's make sure that at level one we say, this is really a poem about hard work, isn't it? Write that down. Hard work. The challenge to do a job where you're all by yourself. I mean, I know in the picture on 658 you have others working, but in this poem, he's all alone, working out in the fields, cutting grass all day long. I once had a student that said he went out to his grandpa's farm, and his grandpa had one of those, and he said, yeah, that was what I used when I was a kid. And they took him out in a field and made him start doing this, and he did all of about 10 feet. And he said his body, this was a big, strong kid who played football and lifted all the time. He said his body was so tired, his back was cramping up and everything, he had to quit. And he goes, Grandpa, how many hours did you have to do this? He said, what do you mean? You started when the sun came up, you finished when the sun went down, and you did it all day until the large fields got done. Well, what fields, Grandpa, were they? He said, look out at that field. And his grandson, my student, went, oh, that's a big field. He goes, no, it would be like that times 10. We worked all day, all summer, and we would do this work. Of course, if you do this by yourself, you're in silence and you're alone. You would think then that his view of this kind of working, notice it's mowing, it's not working, it's mowing, right? This kind of working would be something that he hated. And yet look at the last two lines. The fact is, the sweetest dream that labor knows, my long scythe whispered and left the hay to me. In other words, this is work that he remembers doing, but he remembers being all alone, hard work, and yet rewarding work in some way. Let's jump to 2a. What's our major theme or message here? Well, I think there's a couple of them. One is the value of hard work. Let's write that down. The value of hard work. Right? I mean, back before we had instruments and technologies that allow us to be a little bit lazier and do some work, the old-timers had to do real work. Think about that, right? That is to say, a second major message. As we evolve with our technologies, we're not always so able to respect the old and the technologies that maybe were absent for those old-timers. And this poem says we should pay attention to those people who in an earlier generation did hard labor, and they respected that labor. And that's a last message. Let's write it down. All labor must be respected. I remember once a student who went in and saw his buddy working at Big Mac and started laughing at him. You got to work at Big Mac. And we studied this poem, and I made this observation. No labor, no matter what it is, should be ever disrespected. And anyone willing to do that labor should be respected for that labor. No matter the pay, no matter the prestige, all labor is respectful labor. And my student had to admit that he shouldn't have laughed at his pal and made him feel small for working at a job like at Big Mac. Because all labor is respectful labor if you have the correct attitude towards that labor. And that's obviously a big part of our poem here as well. At 2b, notice the symbolism, and just write it down. What does mowing or haying symbolize in this poem? Some will argue, not just hard labor, but respect of hard labor. The fact that you work hard for the things that matter in your life, the things you have to do in your life, do them well. At 3a, what is for you a text about hard work? The text where somebody in the film or whatever has to work really hard, has to do some kind of really intense hard labor. We think about the great accomplishments of Hercules. You'll maybe remember all those different things that Hercules has to do. In our freshman year, we studied Greek mythology. He has to go out and do all of these amazing things, right? Or Perseus, who has to go out and kill Medusa or whatever. You have those stories in ancient mythology of having to do great and grand deeds. Here, notice, this is not a great or a grand deed, but it's hard work and it's good work. 3b, what's the last time you had to do serious hard labor? What's the hardest work you ever did in your life? Write it down. What's the hardest job you ever did in your life? Somebody else might think it was maybe not so difficult, but you saw it as really, really difficult work. And to that degree, what was a time in your life that you did hard work and you really felt good about it at the end of the day? You knew something more about yourself at the conclusion of it. That is to say, you understood the whisper, to use this poem. You got it. Well, there you go. One more great Robert Frost poem. I hope you enjoy your study of Frost through your high school career and college career as well. Thank you.